The Galactic Concord Assembly gathered in the grand amphitheater of Xylos Prime, a place built from living crystal that shimmered under twin suns. Delegates from over 200 starfaring species sat in tiered rings, their forms as varied as the worlds they came from, some scaled, some feathered, some made of light and shadow. The air hummed with translated whispers, and the low thrum of consensus algorithms running in the background. This was the final session of the Emergency Ethics Tribunal, called to decide the fate of one small blue-green planet on the galactic fringe, Earth. For weeks, the debate had raged. Reports had poured in, some verified, others exaggerated about human behavior. There was the incident near Proxima, where a human freighter had ignored quarantine protocols to deliver medicine to a dying colony. There was the unauthorized deep space probe that had mapped a sacred nebula without permission. And then there was the Titan incident, still classified but widely rumored. A human vessel had recovered alien tech from a derelict ship, and instead of surrendering it to the Concorde, had studied it in secret. To many delegates, this was proof enough. Humans were reckless, curious beyond caution, dangerous in their unpredictability. The final vote began at dawn by Xylos time. Each delegate cast their choice through neural links or biometric tokens. No speeches were allowed, only silence and judgment. When the count concluded, the central spire of the amphitheater glowed crimson. The resolution had passed. Earth and all its affiliated colonies were to be expelled from the Galactic Concorde. Effective immediately, all human vessels were to withdraw from Concord-controlled space within 30 standard days. No exceptions. No appeals. The humans were to be cut off, quarantined not by disease but by decree. Back on Earth, the news broke like a storm. In Houston, Texas, Daniel Carter stood in his small apartment, watching the official feed on a wall screen. He was an aerospace engineer who'd spent 10 years designing atmospheric recyclers for orbital habitats. He wasn't a soldier or a politician, just a man who believed in clean air and quiet mornings. Now the galaxy had branded his species a threat. He turned off the screen and walked to his balcony. Below, the city buzzed with normal life. Cars honking, kids laughing, street vendors calling out specials. None of them knew yet, but they would. In Nairobi, Kenya, Lena Ortiz sat on the edge of Lake Victoria, her bare feet in the cool water. She was a marine biologist who studied coral resilience in warming oceans. She'd just returned from a research dive when her comms pad buzzed with an emergency alert. She read the summary twice, then laughed. A short, sharp sound that startled a nearby egret into flight. "Expelled?" she muttered. "We barely left our own backyard." She thought of the Concorde envoys who'd visited Earth 5 years ago. Polite but distant, scanning everything with cold eyes, never once asking how humans felt about the stars. Now they'd decided humanity didn't belong among them. Fine, she thought. Maybe we'll find better company. Governments scrambled. The United Earth Council called an emergency session. Military bases went on high alert. News networks flooded the airwaves with talking heads debating whether this was an act of xenophobia or justified caution. Some called for defiance, others urged compliance. But beneath the noise, something quieter was happening. In hidden labs, in orbital shipyards, in underground data vaults, people who'd been preparing for this moment for years exchanged coded messages. They didn't panic. They activated Project Horizon had begun decades ago, not as a weapon but as a backup plan. When first contact with the Concorde happened, Earth's leaders had celebrated, but a few scientists and engineers had asked a simple question: what if they don't like us? So they'd built in secret, not bombs, not shields, arcs, vast, self-sustaining vessels designed to carry not just people but entire ecosystems, soil, seeds, animals, libraries, music, memories. Enough to restart civilization if Earth ever fell. The project had been mothballed after the Concorde offered provisional membership. But now, with one vote, it roared back to life. Marcus Bell, a retired astrophysicist with a limp from an old lab accident, received a priority message at 3 a.m. He read it once, then dressed in silence. By sunrise, he was aboard a shuttle heading to Forge Station, a massive dry dock hidden in the asteroid belt. There, Priya Mehta, logistics coordinator and former UN relief worker, was already coordinating the final assembly of the Ark fleet. Engineers welded hull plates. Botanists loaded seed vaults. Programmers uploaded navigation maps stitched together from every star chart humanity had ever made. No one spoke of war. They spoke of departure. The Concord's envoys arrived 3 weeks later. Their sleek silver ship hovered over Geneva, demanding to inspect Earth's compliance. They expected to see grounded fleets, shuttered spaceports, a species humbled by exile. Instead, they found silence. Orbital stations stood empty. Lunar bases powered down. Even the Mars colonies reported zero human presence. When the envoys scanned deeper, they found nothing but automated beacons and drifting debris. It was as if humanity had simply vanished. What they didn't know was that the last ark had launched 2 days earlier, slipping past the outer rim of the solar system using stealth drives powered by recycled solar wind. Aboard it, children slept in cryopods while elders watched Earth shrink on rear-view screens. Daniel Carter monitored oxygen levels in hydroponic bays. Lena Ortiz checked the health of the last coral samples, now sealed in biocontainers. Marcus Bell stood on the observation deck, his hand resting on the cool glass, whispering something no one else could hear. The Concorde declared Earth officially abandoned. They marked the Sol system as restricted, a cautionary tale for young species. But in the void between stars, far from prying sensors, the Ark fleet sailed on. They weren't running away. They were moving forward, and they hadn't waited to be told twice. While the conquered envoys hovered over a silent Earth, convinced they had won, the truth drifted far beyond their reach. Deep in the asteroid belt, hidden behind the shadow of Ceres, Forge Station pulsed with quiet urgency. It was not a military base or a secret weapon facility. It was a cradle. And from it, humanity's future had already been born. The Ark fleet had not been built overnight. Its roots went back to the early days of space colonization, when a few far-sighted scientists and engineers began asking hard questions. What if Earth became uninhabitable? What if first contact went wrong? What if the galaxy didn't welcome them with open arms? So they planned. They saved. They built in silence, using civilian contracts and off-the-books funding to assemble the pieces. When the Concorde vote came, they were ready. Marcus Bell stood on the central command deck of Genesis 1, the lead Ark. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from exhaustion. He hadn't slept in 36 hours. Around him, crew members moved with calm purpose. No one shouted. No one panicked. They had trained for this moment for years, even if most of them hadn't known the exact shape it would take. Priya Mehta coordinated supply transfers from smaller haulers, her voice steady over the comms. "Confirm nitrogen levels in Bay 7, she said. "We can't afford another algae bloom." Below decks, Elena Ruiz adjusted the lighting in the biodome. Rows of wheat, soy, and potatoes grew under soft violet lamps. She ran her fingers over a young tomato plant, checking for pests. Every gram of food mattered now. There would be no resupply, no backup. The Arks carried enough seeds, soil, and nutrients to sustain millions for generations, if managed perfectly. Elena had spent her life studying closed-loop ecosystems on Earth. Now, that knowledge was the difference between survival and starvation. In the navigation wing, Jake Morrison studied star charts that looked more like poetry than science. The slipstream drives, reverse-engineered from alien wreckage found near Saturn's moon Titan, were still experimental. They bent space in ways human math barely understood. But they worked. And they were fast, faster than anything the Concorde possessed. Jake had flown test runs in prototype shuttles, vanishing from one point in space and reappearing light years away with only a faint hum and a ripple in the sensors. Now he was teaching others how to read the ripples, how to listen to the silence between stars. Life aboard the Arks settled into a rhythm. Shifts rotated every 6 hours. Meals were simple: rehydrated grains, lab-grown protein, fresh greens from the domes. Children attended school in repurposed cargo bays, learning not just history and math, but how to fix a water recycler or calibrate a solar sail. Elders shared stories of Earth, of rain on rooftops, of walking barefoot in grass, of watching fireflies on summer nights. These stories were recorded, archived, passed down like heirlooms. Not everyone agreed with the plan. Some thought they should have fought. Others believed hiding was cowardice. In the mess hall one evening, a young engineer named Leo slammed his tray down and said, "We let them kick us out like dogs." We didn't even argue. Daniel Carter, sitting nearby, looked up from his meal. "Arguing wouldn't have changed their minds," he said quietly. They'd already decided we were dangerous. Fighting would have just proven them right. Leo frowned but didn't reply. Later, he signed up for hydroponics training. Action, he realized, was its own kind of answer. The Arcs were not warships. They carried no missiles, no plasma cannons, no shields designed for battle. Their defense was distance, silence, and speed. Their strength was in what they carried, not weapons, but wheat fields, libraries, symphonies, DNA banks, and the stubborn hope that somewhere out there, the universe might still have a place for them. As the fleet moved deeper into uncharted space, communication with Earth ceased entirely. The last message received was a final broadcast from Geneva. "We are proud of you. Go well." After that, static. Then nothing. Some cried, others held vigils. But work continued. There was always work. Marcus often walked the observation corridors late at night. He would press his palm against the cool, transparent steel and watch the stars blur as the slipstream engaged. He remembered the day he first saw Earth from orbit, how small it looked, how fragile. Now Earth was gone, not destroyed, but left behind by choice. That was the hardest part. They hadn't been forced out. They had chosen to leave before the door slammed shut. Priya joined him one evening, holding 2 cups of synthetic coffee. "We're 3 weeks out from the last known Concorde patrol route," she said. "If they're looking for us, they'll be looking in the wrong direction." Marcus nodded. "Good. Let them think we're hiding in some asteroid cave. Meanwhile, we're heading where no one's ever gone." Down in the cultural archive, Noah Kim was digitizing old films, songs, and books. He'd saved everything from Shakespeare to street graffiti, from Beethoven to hip-hop. "We're not just saving people," he told a group of students. "We're saving what makes us human. Not the wars or the mistakes, but the dreams, the art, the questions we never stopped asking." The Arcs carried over 2 million souls across 12 vessels. Each one was a floating world, self-contained, self-reliant. They traveled in loose formation, close enough to support each other, far enough to avoid detection. Their path was not random. They followed faint energy signatures, gravitational anomalies, whispers in the cosmic background radiation, clues left behind by things older than the Concorde, older than humanity itself. No one knew what they would find out here. But they knew one thing for certain: they were not running away. They were moving toward something, and they had everything they needed to build it. As Genesis 1 slipped past the edge of the known galaxy, its lights dimmed to near invisibility. Inside, a child laughed in a classroom. A farmer harvested lettuce. An engineer fixed a leak in the oxygen line. Life went on. Quietly, purposefully, without permission. And the galaxy, for now, did not notice them at all. Time stretched like taffy in the deep void. Months passed without sunrise or sunset. Only the steady hum of life support and the soft chime of shift changes. Aboard Genesis 1, routines became rituals. Children who had once known Earth only through stories now spoke of the Ark as home. They played in hydroponic corridors, climbed maintenance ladders like jungle gyms, and traced constellations on classroom screens that no one in the Concorde had ever named. Jake Morrison, now a senior navigator, spent most of his days in the observation blister, a small dome at the ship's bow where the stars seemed close enough to touch. He taught new recruits how to read the subtle bends in space, how to feel the pull of distant masses before sensors picked them up. "Space isn't empty," he'd say. "It sings. You just have to learn the tune." His hands moved over holographic controls with the ease of someone who'd spent years listening to silence. Below, Elena Ruiz walked through the central biodome, her boots damp from morning irrigation. Wheat swayed under artificial suns. Bees buzzed between flowering fruit trees. She paused by a patch of wild strawberries, tiny, tart, and precious. They were the first crop to fruit without genetic tweaking. A small victory, but it made her smile. She remembered Nairobi, the smell of wet earth after rain, the sound of birds at dawn. Those memories were fading like old photographs left in the sun. But here life grew anyway. That was enough. Not everything was calm. Tension simmered in the lower decks. Supplies were tight. A minor algae contamination in Water Recycler 3 caused a 2-day ration cut. Some whispered that the fleet should turn back, that they'd gone too far, that there was nothing out here but death and dust. Marcus Bell heard the rumors. He didn't scold or silence them. Instead, he held open forums in the central atrium, standing on a crate with a voice hoarse from age but steady with conviction. "We left because they told us we didn't belong," he said once. "But belonging isn't given, it's built, and we're building it right here." Priya Mehta managed the unrest with quiet efficiency. She reallocated rations, scheduled extra counseling sessions, and assigned restless crew members to new projects, like mapping cosmic dust clouds or testing seed viability in low gravity. She knew that idleness bred fear. Purpose bred hope. Then on the 412th day of drift, the sensors picked up something strange. It wasn't a ship. Not a planet. Not even a star. It was a signal, faint, rhythmic, repeating every 7.3 seconds. It came from the edge of the Helios drift, a vast nebula long marked as impassable on Concord charts. The gas there was too dense, the magnetic fields too chaotic. No sane pilot would enter it. But the signal, it felt intentional. Jake brought the data to Marcus immediately. They studied it in the dim light of the navigation room. "It's not random noise," Jake said. "It's structured. Like a beacon," Marcus frowned. "Or a warning." They called a council. Priya, Elena, Noah Kim, Daniel Carter, and a dozen others gathered around the hollow table. The debate was short. They had come this far. They couldn't ignore a voice in the dark. Genesis 1 altered course. The fleet followed, slipping into the outer veil of the Helios drift. Inside the nebula, visibility dropped to near zero. Sensors flickered. Gravity readings jumped without cause. The ship groaned as if walking through thick fog. For 3 days they pushed forward, guided only by the pulse of that strange signal. On the 4th day they saw it. A structure. Immense. Silent. Orbiting a dead star that gave off no light. Only cold. It was made of black alloy, smooth as glass, shaped like a series of interlocking rings wider than Earth's orbit. No lights, no movement, just stillness, ancient and absolute. Elena and Noah led the first survey team. They boarded a shuttle with minimal gear, scanners, sample kits, and personal journals. As they approached, the rings seemed to drink the light around them. The shuttle's instruments went quiet one by one, as if the structure didn't want to be measured. They landed on a flat platform near the innermost ring. The air outside was thin but breathable somehow. The ground was warm to the touch. Inside they found corridors lined with crystalline panels. When Noah placed his hand on one, images flared to life, not in any language but in feelings, memories, concepts. He saw oceans boiling under twin suns. He saw cities built from song. He saw a species, tall, slender, with eyes like liquid silver, planting seeds on 1,000 worlds. One of those worlds had blue skies and green forests. Earth. They were here, Elena whispered, tears in her eyes. They made us, the archives told more. The beings called themselves the Vera. They believed intelligence was a cosmic imperative, not a rare accident. So they seeded life across the galaxy, then watched from afar, waiting for their children to reach the stars. But something happened. A great silence fell. The Vera vanished. Before they did, they left warnings. One name appeared again and again, the Concord. According to the Vera records, the Concord was not what it claimed to be. It was not a union of equals. It was a machine of control, designed to suppress emerging species before they could challenge its order. It labeled curiosity as aggression, innovation as threat, independence as rebellion. Earth hadn't been expelled for being dangerous. It had been targeted for its potential, for its hunger to learn, to grow, to ask why. Noah recorded everything. Every image, every symbol, every emotional echo. Back on Genesis 1, the data spread like fire. People gathered in common areas, watching the Vera's story unfold on every screen. Some wept, some raged. Others sat in stunned silence. Marcus called another meeting, this time with the entire fleet on open channel. His voice was weak but clear. "We thought we were alone," he said, "but we were never meant to be. The Vera saw something in us, and the Concord fears it." He paused. "We have a choice now. We can hide forever in the dark, or we can carry this truth back." Jake stood up. "If we go back, they'll hunt us." "Maybe," Marcus said. "But if we stay silent, they'll keep silencing others." That night, no one slept. In the biodome, Elena watered the strawberries, her hands steady. In the engine room, Daniel checked the slipstream coils for the 10th time. In the archives, Noah backed up the Vera data onto every storage drive they had. They weren't just refugees anymore. They were witnesses, and witnesses had a duty. As Genesis 1 turned away from the dead star and the silent rings, its course shifted, not deeper into the void, but back toward the edge of known space. Toward the galaxy that had cast them out. Toward the truth they now carried like a torch. The long drift was over. The return had begun. The scout ship Dawn Chaser slipped through the outer rim of conquered space like a shadow through tall grass. It was small, sleek, and painted matte black to absorb radar and light. Inside, Jake Morrison sat alone at the controls, his eyes fixed on the star field ahead. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Not from fear, but from focus. Every blink felt like a risk. Behind him, in a sealed data core, rested the entire archive of the Vera, every image, every warning, every truth about the Conquered's hidden history. It wasn't just information. It was a key, and Jake was about to turn it in the lock of a galaxy that had forgotten its own past. He didn't plan to fight. He didn't plan to negotiate. He planned to speak. The Dawn Chaser carried no weapons, only a powerful broadcast array, built from salvaged comms gear and Vera-inspired resonance tech. Its mission was simple: reach the Conquered central relay hub near the planet Kalis and transmit the archive on every open frequency. Let the truth spread like wind through dry grass. The Concord thought humanity was gone. They had declared, Earth abandoned, scrubbed human records from public databases, and moved on. Patrols had thinned. Surveillance drones idled in storage bays. No one expected a ghost to return. Jake entered Concord space at the edge of the Kalis system. He killed the engines and drifted, letting the ship mimic space debris. Sensors swept past him twice, then moved on. Good. They saw only what they expected to see. He waited until the night cycle of Kalis Prime, when the relay hub's maintenance crews changed shifts. Then, with silent thrusters, he nudged the Dawn Chaser into position behind a derelict cargo buoy. From there, he activated the broadcast array. A soft hum filled the cabin. Lights blinked green. Now, he whispered. The signal burst out, not as a single wave, but as 1,000 echoes, each tuned to a different species communication band. It carried the Vera's story in images, sounds, emotions, and translated text. It showed the seeding of Earth. It showed the Concord's early purges of rising civilizations. It showed the lies wrapped in law, the fear dressed as order. Within minutes, the hub's alarms blared, but not for intrusion. For data overload. The archive was flooding every public channel, every news feed, every school network, every private comm line. Citizens across the Concord woke to visions of silver-eyed beings planting life on barren worlds. They saw their own histories rewritten. They saw the truth. On the ocean world of Virel, a young fisher named Tarn dropped his net when his wristcom showed the Vera planting coral-like spires in his ancestors' seas. On the desert moon of Sorak, a teacher paused her lesson as the archive played in the classroom wall, showing how her people's savage past had been erased to justify conquered rule. On dozens of worlds, people gathered in streets not with weapons but with questions. Why were we never told? Who decided we couldn't know? Were we also seeded? The Concord assembly scrambled, emergency protocols activated, firewalls rose. But it was too late. The truth had roots now. It grew faster than they could cut it. Back on Genesis 1, Marcus Bell watched the chaos unfold through encrypted relay drones. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with quiet fire. Priya stood beside him, arms crossed, jaw tight. "They'll come for us," she said. "Let them," Marcus replied. "But this time, they won't be chasing refugees. They'll be chasing witnesses." Jake didn't stay to watch the fallout. As soon as the broadcast finished, he powered down the array and fired the slipstream drive. The Dawn Chaser vanished in a ripple of distorted space, reappearing 3 light-years away before Conquered interceptors even cleared the hangar. He returned to the fleet not as a hero, but as a messenger. When he stepped onto Genesis 1's deck, no one cheered. They simply nodded. They knew what he'd done, they knew what it meant. The fleet held position in the dark, far from any star, far from any eye. But they were no longer hiding. They were waiting. Within a week, strange ships began appearing on long-range scanners. Not Conquered, but civilian vessels, freighters, even private yachts. They came from fringe worlds, from oppressed colonies, from places the conquered had silenced for generations. They weren't armed. They carried families. They carried questions. And they carried hope. One ship, the starling dawn from the ocean moon of Varel, hailed Genesis 1. Its captain, a woman named Mira, spoke with tears in her voice. "We saw the archive," she said. "We saw our true history. We don't want to live in lies anymore. Can we join you?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Open the bay doors," he told Priya. More came. A mining vessel from Sorak, a science skiff from the ice rings of Nul, a transport filled with students who'd walked out of conquered academies the day after the broadcast. Each one carried stories of awakening, of rebellion, of quiet courage. They didn't ask for protection. They asked for partnership. The Ark fleet grew, not in ships, but in spirit. Humanity was no longer alone. They had become a beacon, not by force, but by truth. The conquered sent envoys again, not warships but diplomatic cruisers, their hulls bearing the old symbols of unity. They requested a meeting. Marcus agreed, but only on neutral ground, only with open channels, and only if every species in the conquered could listen. The meeting took place near the ruins of an old listening post. Marcus stood on the comms deck of Genesis 1, his image projected across 1,000 worlds. He didn't shout, he didn't accuse, he simply said, "We didn't come back to fight. We came back to remember. The Vera believed every species had a right to know where it came from and to choose where it goes next. That right belongs to you too." Silence followed. Then from 100 systems, voices rose, not in anger, but in agreement. The conquered didn't collapse that day, but its grip cracked. And through the cracks light poured in. Humanity hadn't returned with weapons. They'd returned with memory. And memory, it turned out, was the hardest thing in the galaxy to erase. As the envoys left, confused and shaken, Jake stood once more in the observation blister. Stars glittered like scattered seeds. Somewhere out there, new stories were beginning, and this time, humans wouldn't be written out of them. They had been expelled, but they had come back as something the galaxy hadn't expected. Not invaders, not subjects, but keepers of a forgotten truth. And that, Jake thought, was more powerful than any fleet. The conquered did not fall in a day. Empires never do. But the cracks spread fast like frost on thin glass. After the broadcast, the silence that followed was louder than any explosion. Species that had obeyed for generations began to ask questions their ancestors had been too afraid to speak. Schools reopened old archives. Elders told stories that had been buried under layers of official history. And everywhere people looked at the stars not as borders but as bridges. Humanity did not return to Earth. They did not ask for their old seat in the assembly. They did not demand apologies or reparations. Instead, they stayed where they were, on the edge of known space near the ruins of the Vera rings, and opened their doors. Not to conquered officials, not to generals or diplomats, but to anyone who came seeking truth, shelter, or a new beginning. The first to arrive were the Varelians, their ship patched with seaweed resin and hope. Then came the Sorak miners, their faces lined with dust and defiance. After them, scholars from the ice academies of Nul, artists from the floating cities of Zenth, and even a handful of young conquered citizens who had walked away from privilege to stand with the forgotten. They brought no armies. They brought seeds, songs, tools, and trust. Genesis 1 became a meeting place. Its biodomes now grew alien crops alongside human wheat. Its classrooms taught in 12 languages. Elena Ruiz worked side by side with a Varelian botanist named Kale, learning how to grow sky moss that purified air twice as fast as Earth algae. Daniel Carter helped Sorak engineers rebuild fusion cores using methods older than the Concorde itself. Noah Kim recorded every new story, adding them to the archive, not as footnotes but as equal chapters in a shared history. Marcus Bell, now, frail and leaning on a cane made from reclaimed ship metal, walked the corridors slowly. He no longer gave speeches. He listened. He sat with elders from 12 worlds, sharing tea brewed from asteroid lichen, and asked them what kind of future they dreamed of. "Not one ruled by fear," said a Zenth musician, plucking notes on a stringed instrument that hummed like wind through caves. "One built on listening." The conquered tried to respond. At first they called the Ark fleet a cult, a rogue cell spreading dangerous lies. Then, when protests swelled on member worlds, they offered reforms, empty promises wrapped in old rules. But the people had tasted truth and they would not go back to silence. Jake Morrison piloted shuttles between the Arks and the new arrivals, his hands steady, his eyes calm. He no longer saw himself as just a navigator. He was a guide. He showed newcomers how to read the stars not as maps of control, but as stories written in light. "The Vera didn't give us directions," he told a group of young refugees one evening. "They gave us questions, and that's how you find your way." Priya Mehta managed the growing community with quiet grace. She set up councils where every species had a voice not by population or power but by presence. Decisions were made slowly through discussion, not decree. There were disagreements over resource sharing, over language barriers, over old wounds, but they were faced together. No one was cast out, no one was silenced. One day a small conquered shuttle appeared on the edge of the fleet's perimeter. It carried no weapons, no envoys in formal robes, just one person. A young woman named Lyra, who had once worked in the Concord's historical archives. She had seen the Vera data before it was purged. She had tried to warn her superiors. They had demoted her, then erased her access. Now she brought something more valuable than secrets. She brought a list. Names of worlds the Concord had quietly suppressed, species they had labeled unstable simply for asking too many questions. Marcus met her in the central atrium. He didn't thank her. He didn't praise her. He simply said, "You're safe here." And that was enough. The Ark fleet began reaching out to those worlds. Not with fleets, but with messages, broadcasts of music, crop data, medical knowledge, and open invitations. Some said no. Some were too afraid. But many said yes. One by one, ships arrived carrying families, farmers, teachers, dreamers. The fleet was no longer just human. It was something new. Something the galaxy had never seen before. A union not of law, but of choice. The Conquered, desperate to regain control, sent a final delegation. This time they came not to command, but to plead. They offered humanity full reinstatement, trade rights, even a seat on the High Council. Marcus listened politely, then shook his head. "We don't want your seat," he said. "We want your honesty. Admit what you've done. Free the worlds you've held down, and stop pretending you speak for the galaxy." The delegation left without an answer. But within weeks, small changes began. Patrols withdrew from fringe systems. Censorship laws were quietly lifted on 3 worlds. A historian on Kalis published a paper about the Vera, and it wasn't deleted. It wasn't revolution. It was evolution. Slow, quiet, unstoppable. Years passed. Children born on the Arks knew no other home. They spoke hybrid languages, played games that mixed Earth rules with alien rhythms, and looked at the stars not with fear, but with curiosity. They called themselves the Driftborn, and they carried no memory of exile, only of belonging. One evening, Marcus stood once more in the observation blister. His breath was shallow, his steps slow. Jake joined him, holding 2 cups of warm grain tea. Outside, the fleet glowed softly against the dark, human arcs. Virelian skiffs, Sorak haulers, Zenth gliders, all drifting together like a constellation of hope. "We did it," Jake said softly. Marcus smiled. "No, we started it. They'll finish it." He pointed to a group of children floating in 0G near a cargo bay, laughing as they taught each other how to fold paper stars from old data sheets. Among them were human, Virelian, Sorak, and Zenth faces, different but equal. The galaxy had voted to expel Earth. Humanity hadn't waited to be told twice. And in leaving, they had found not just survival but purpose, not just a place among the stars, but a reason to shine. As Marcus closed his eyes for the last time, the fleet sailed on quiet, steady, and free,